In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Great Atuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, I'm David.
I'm Catherine.
And welcome to Dining Table Discworld. Today, we'll be talking about Equal Rites by Terry Pratchett. This is the 3rd Discworld novel and was published in 1987. Still not quite old enough to read it when it came out. Anyway, Cathy, do you have a synopsis?
Yes. As is apparently tradition, a dying wizard travels to pass his staff on to the 8th son of an 8th son, who in this case has just been born. However, he doesn't check the sex of the baby, so wizardly power is passed to a girl. Over the years, Granny Weatheraxe, midwife and witch, keeps an eye on young Esk Smith in their very mountainous and rural village and tries to teach her witchery, but it doesn't take. So Granny and Esk travel to the very urban Ankh-Morpork and the Unseen University to get Esk trained in wizardry. But it turns out UU aren't willing to change their male-only admissions, so Esk has to learn on the sly until she can prove her worth.
As a synopsis,
that is what happens in the book.
I know, but as a synopsis, that's actually quite a dull book, so...
Well,
there's hijinks and magic throughout. It just.
Yeah.
When you put it like that,
maybe it's because this one didn't strike me so much. Should we go into initial
yes,
impressions?
I think we'll go to initial impressions.
If you want to start, do your own synopsis and checking them beforehand, you can do. But
I get what you. It's exactly what happens. But when you kind of distill it like that as to the core plot elements.
I suppose I didn't mention the fullness of the end. But,
no, I mean that's fair enough. But anyway, what's your?
So almost certain this is the first Discworld book I read, and I would have been 14 at youngest, maybe 15, and this would be after I had probably spent some time seeing Discworld books around, looking at the covers, reading the blurbs in the local bookshop, because I did that with a lot of fantasy books in my teens. And I can't remember why I chose this one particularly. I know for a while I didn't pick up Discworld because it looked a bit grown up and odd because of the covers. And I partly wonder if this one, it's got less kind of like scantily clad ladies on the front than some of the others I would have seen. Well, in fact, there's none.
Yeah, there's none.
Yeah, which I will get to.
All the ladies are fully clothed.
Yes, I'll get to that bit. But I don't know if that's what chose it or if it just seems good. But I remember reading it and thinking, oh, that wasn't quite as good as I thought, but it did inspire me to read more. Which I think is why I'm not 100% sure this was the first one, because I just remember not being too bowled over by whichever was the first one, but thinking it was interesting enough to try some others. So on this read, it's good, but it's not great.
I think we're going to have similar.
Yeah, it's fine. I think it introduces a lot of things. It does more stuff than Discworld. I'll go into some of the themes, which I thought were interesting, and it promises a load of stuff at the end that then doesn't come about later in the series, which I now know. Yeah, it's fine. But there's also, I think there's still an element of we're going to do a bit of a travel around the disc, section in it as well, which you've kind of already done a couple of times.
Yeah, I've got to say I agree. It's not. This is not one I'm that enamoured with. I didn't read it first. It would have been after I read Reaper Man. I would have gone back and read them. So this would have been, book 4 effectively I'd have read. And I think it's interesting. He starts obviously looking at some of the themes, the social themes that he will go into more. It's obviously about gender and
yes,
roles.
I'm going to say some stuff.
Yeah, that's which is fine. It's quite a significant part of the book. So obviously he's dabbling with that more than he did with the previous 2, which were a bit more plays on classic fantasy than so it's and it introduces more of the disc in proto forms. I think the university changes again because obviously this is a slightly different view of the university than we had in
which should be interesting, but it also feels like it's quite different
Let's start with the university.
I think my other initial thought is like, if you're like, oh yes, you should read the Witch series, for example. I wouldn't start with this one. You start with Weird Sisters.
You start with Weird Sisters.
Like this is technically one, but like you start with Weird Sisters.
This is not another. This is not one of the. This is one you start with novels. In fact, we've got a couple more to get through before we get to.
Yeah.
I think Weird Sisters would be the first, because we've got Sorcery and Pyramids to get through yet.
Oh, it's Pyramids. It's more, and then Sorcery. But yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so the point is, you know, if you're going to start with Discworld, you don't start with this one. Come back to it later.
I did start with this one, and it was fine. But yes, it didn't stand out terribly well. I think I remember being a little bit disappointed with it at the time I read it. Bearing in mind I was a teenage girl at that point.
I'm saying, wondering some of the themes helped you appreciate it more than if you'd have read one of the other two.
I don't really know some of those later, but I think I picked it and then can't remember specifically why now. And then it was fine, but I wasn't blown away by it, but I was interested enough to keep going.
I think both of us are. It's okay.
Yeah.
As I say, there's nothing terrible about it.
I feel like I have more substantive things I could say about it in general now than I could when I was 14.
Which is fair enough. Okay, so where do we want to start?
Okay. Starting with the initial thing, I started reading it, and there's the whole Eighth Son of the Eighth Son thing, which isn't mentioned before, and it's acted like this is a big tradition, but it doesn't match with the previous wizard stuff, because the whole thing's, wizards, you know,
I get
pass on their power, like, wizards are always murdering each other. A thing I would not have thought as a sort of 14, 15-year-old, but did think this time is, eighth son of an eighth son. You're only going to get that in a place where there's not easy and reliable access to contraceptives. And then that turned out to be more of a theme than I had recalled, perhaps unsurprisingly, being a sheltered teenager. I feel like this is the first mention. Obviously the whole 8 thing is a big thing with magic. The previous wizard books were all a bit like, wizards are always like killing each other off, and even if you're a bit out of the politics of the UU, there's also that solid idea that magical people know when they're going to die, because obviously that's the big thing with the witches, and it's just that the wizard knows and he can tell death's coming because they can see death, and because before it was just that death's always there. It's like Rites when death was there. The point is a lot of them get murdered by surprise, so it doesn't actually tie up.
That
it's
doesn't
like,
tie up
I know I'm going to die, but also my colleagues have killed me. It doesn't... So it's two different things.
Unless we presume they always know going to know when they'll die of natural causes, but a knife in the back,
or a spell, or
isn't natural causes.
I mean, hell, even that guy in the previous book who was in that trying to hide from death and then didn't put air holes in. I've now been rewatching Good Place, and yes, it's very much like one of the deaths in that, which I described. What a grim death that would have been.
Yeah,
but yes,
I think the introduction to the eighth son of the eighth son idea. I mean, obviously we've got the seventh son and seventh son.
Yeah, I can't even think where that's from. Is that it's just because 7's like a magic-y number? Yeah. I guess.
But I think it just happens to be. I don't think all wizards are 8 sons of 8 sons.
No.
In the disc, I think it's just. There is one coming up. I'm about to die. Let's pass on my staff to someone who is intrinsically going to be magical because they're the 8th son of an 8th son.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a plot device to get.
Kind of, yeah. It's based it's based off of a fantasy trope that already exists, just like more Discworld.
And I mean, I can't remember what the character in Sorcery, whether they're an 8th son of an 8th son.
Well, they're the son of a wizard, that's the whole point. But I think he might be the 8th son of a wizard. So, because he is wizardry squared, and this is a source.
Yes.
There's a maths joke.
Yeah, we'll get onto this. Yeah. So obviously he uses it, it's used later in a story, but it doesn't really come up afterwards.
I think once the wizards get a bit more reformed to the kind of just seeing the academic side.
Yeah, more academics than murdering.
I mean... I suppose there's class issues because there's the whole thing some of them are obviously quite wealthy, which suggests that maybe there aren't 8 kids or the family's very wealthy, whereas others are poor, and it's well, maybe they did have 7 siblings.
You just don't know.
That's very much background thing.
Yeah.
One thing I will say about equal rights, particularly reading them in order now, is it occurs to me, Terry Pratchett did well with 2 books that were based off of very traditional epic fantasy, different bits of that.
The 2 main
prestigious
male leads.
Yeah, and frankly, he could, as many fantasy authors had and probably still do have a career just writing that sort of thing, with a load of blokes doing stuff mostly, and ladies are about.
Could have just been the Adventures of Rincewind.
Yeah, but the fact that his third book is very much... he sort of says at the beginning it's about sex. He means like sort of sex and gender. Yeah. Although I will come on to how actually the other stuff's sort of there a bit. Like he says, it's not about that. Well, it's subtext. Yeah, he started it not just with like a female character, but with something that was very feminine, but not sexualized, because the two characters are an old lady and a small child.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the what's her name? Helena from the previous book. There was a thing, he said, she's too big to be a thief and she doesn't agree with being an assassin, and she's too smart to be a wife, and it's like, that's a bit rude, but fine. And then it meant, obviously in a roundabout way, because it's a Discworld, mentions sex work, and that's not a thing she's interested in. It's kind of like, these are the options for ladies. But in this, obviously, it goes into more stuff. I mean, witch being a big part of that. But the point is, I think he knows that fantasy stuff can be a bit that way, here's the lady hero, and the whole cover artist thing, which then the actual cover artist did, thus undercutting the joke. But in this, it's an old lady and a little girl. Yes. So there's none of that, really. I think that there's one point at the end when the wizard, sort of, who's also an old bloke, kind of notices Granny Weatherax a bit. And that's sort of it. And it's like, from the point of view of that kind of thing, although again, there's a subtext to it, which I'll get into if we talk about kind of the role of witches a bit. But yes. I just think it's good. It's kind of refreshing that this, in the 80s, guy was like, I'm going to write a book with some female characters, and the kind of female characters who don't normally get to be in fantasy, particularly.
No, I think I'm trying to think of what was being written around at the time. I can't think of anything that would have had.
Obviously, I don't remember.
No, I mean, obviously, I don't remember from the time either. I was 7.
Well, that's...
But, my reading age was reasonable, but, it was still a few years before I started dipping into... And yeah, I mean, female characters do exist in fantasy novels from that age, but they're not normally...
Well, there always have been women writing fantasy and stuff that's that focus. It's just it doesn't end up being the stuff that's remembered because of various reasons. It's kind of refreshing. And the fact that he starts the most... Because it's the most feminine sub-series of Discworld. I mean, we said you kind of think of Weird Sisters as the start of the witch books, but this one is...
Technically
it's proto-start, but it is... That whole run is very feminine. Yes. The whole series is mostly about women. Men are in it, but they're just around, much like how women are in many other things.
It's the witches doing stuff and getting stuff done.
Did you have any?
Oh no, you're doing quite well at this point. I'm just going to let you're on a roll here, so I'll butt in when I've got something.
Oh, okay, sure. A lot of this is kind of about the role of witches and
that's fine.
Women. Well, so the thing at the beginning where he says it's not about sex, the act, it's about, like, he doesn't say gender because I think people had slightly different terms for things in the 80s, but yeah. But much of the unsaid stuff that is alluded to about witches' work is about sex.
Yes.
Because there's all... And Esk doesn't understand it because she's like... Well, she starts out as being... I mean, obviously she's a baby initially, and then I think she starts being a bit of a character when she's 6. But then it seems some time passes, but it's not clear how long. She's like a bit older. Because I kept thinking she was 6, and then suddenly there was something I mentioned. I was like, oh no, she's older.
She's not a tween yet. She's not...
I think it's like 9 or something. Yeah. Like, the oldest she could possibly be 12, but I don't think it quite gets that far.
No.
But there's stuff she doesn't understand, and even Granny thinks, she's seen farm animals doing stuff, but hasn't put together. But, Esk is encountering those witches, she's seeing what they do, she's kind of apprenticing with Granny. And there's clearly stuff that, because the role of witches is a role of, like, healthcare and, the wise women, the herbal women, midwifery. So there's stuff about, like, people are clearly buying aphrodisiacs from witches. People are clearly buying contraceptives from witches. I don't think abortificants but the stuff you use for abortion, I don't think that's directly mentioned. No. I'm not even sure it's that much alluded to, but that would be part of the same thing.
The equivalent of the morning after pill.
No, sort of stuff like pennyroyal tea or the Rapunzel lettuce. The herbal stuff people do,
No, but something like the equivalent of that. Sorry, what I meant was.
Well, the after is far too.
Yes, no. What I meant was it was just kind of the stuff that.
The kind of herbal stuff rather than, I suppose, a more medical intervention.
Yes, no, definitely all,
Yeah, so I don't think that's directly mentioned, but I feel like it's kind of in the mix because there's definitely stuff about aphrodisiacs and kind of like love potions a bit, but what is a love potion, really?
Yeah, I think the contraceptives is the most like the big thing for,
again, it's a mixture of contraceptives and
also
preventatives.
Performance enhancements for men.
Yeah. That's kind of what I meant by aphrodisiacs. And there's just a whole female community. So, there's the whole thing of the witches visiting each other, which is obviously an ongoing theme. Yes, Granny's the witch for that village, but she's visiting other witches. Numerous witches are mentioned. Numerous witches are always mentioned. The Ramtops is obviously full of them, which is actually a theme of many later books. And they are servicing their communities, sometimes on the sly as well as more... Because midwifery is obviously respectable. And, there's lots of herb stuff. There's lots of stuff that, is general kinds of healing. Although, again, I wouldn't be surprised if some of it was for, venereal disease of some kind. Because I think there's stuff where Esk knows how to mix up all the stuff, but she doesn't know what all of it's for.
Yeah.
And then when she goes to the town... There's a witch there, but she has to keep a bit more on the sly. So they're doing fortunes and stuff like that. But clearly, what she's selling is a little bit more under the table.
Yeah.
So there's that. It's interesting when you compare, because the whole thing is like wizardry is masculine and witchery is feminine, and that's how it works. That means Esk is a bit weird because she has wizardly power as a newborn, and she's given this staff, and it kind of has a connection with her, even though Granny tries to kind of. And that means Esk is doing stuff in a different way. And it's all very, gendered and I guess a bit bioessentialist. But
obviously, she can tap into the witch parts of the stuff. So she's not a woman with the man's power. She's the bridge between both.
Well, I think that's what she becomes, but at first it just seems like Granny's trying to get... Because a lot of obviously witchery is like headology, which is like psychology, but like more Granny and more rural.
And a pointed hat.
And a pointy hat, yeah, well that's part of it. And a lot of it's like herbal stuff.
Yes.
So I think it's more where it actually is magic, it's a bit different, and that's where Granny has trouble and thinks, she has to take her to wizards.
She does because Esk does borrowing.
Yes, which is wrong.
Yes, but it's a very quintessential witch ability.
Yes, that's true.
That is a very, and then she does it wrong only because she tries to butt in too much. She doesn't do.
And this is the question, because Granny has learned the subtlety of riding along in the mind of an animal. Is that a learned thing because she's always taught it? Whereas Esk is like, I'm going to take this over now. Is that being implied as being a more masculine thing that Esk is doing because of wizardry, or is that how Esk is as a person? And it's hard to.
It's difficult to know the difference. Yeah, I mean, I'd be inclined to say that was just Esk being
six.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. She wanted to fly, and so yeah, that I could see that being you're a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
But also being able to tap into a wellspring of, I think they power because they imply that the witch's power comes from the land.
Oh, it's not even quite that much.
Oh, definitely later in books it's all about the land.
Yes, later, yeah, but
but it's not. But with the wizard power, you're kind of tapping into this source from another plane. It's just this big battery of power that you can tap into, and all the inherent risks that come along with it.
Yes, which I guess that's kind of the thing that Granny feels like she has to go to the wizards for, because that's the bit she's not so familiar with. Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look at the way they do it, so like I say, the witch stuff's very much kind of an apprenticeship, or you're going around, you're following around, you're learning it. And then if you look at the wizards have this hierarchical, pedagogical, formal education system. They have a university.
Yes.
They have, they have all these ranks and orders and things. I mean, there's less of this than the other book. It's clearly still a thing.
Plays down the orders and the
There's
things.
Still a hierarchy, though.
But there's definitely a hierarchy. That's the whole point.
Because that lad, whose name I've forgotten.
Simon?
Yeah, sure. the lad, there's the whole thing where he's new, but then he's teaching other students quite quickly because he's very talented, or because he's very powerful, or because he can think a bit outside of
maths.
Regular. Yeah, sure. You can comment on the maths, I guess. But
yes, it's Simon.
But the point is he's performing well within this very formal education system they have, whereas with the witches, it's a lot more like, oh, we'll go visit her, and we'll go visit her, and you'll see me do these things, and you'll do this. Yeah. And it's very on the job, and it's more community-based, because you are serving a community. Who are the wizards serving? Literally no one. They have a community serving them,
yes,
but other than the occasional civic thing that Ankh-Morpork we'll see later, they're not really... It's probably more of a liability than anything else.
Very much. I mean, it's kind of... It's very...
They can just keep them in one place so they don't start fighting and racking more stuff.
It's a kind of like a research establishment, and no one's really sure what... They're poking at the edges of reality, which is not necessarily a good thing all the time.
Yeah, so witches, it's community-based, it's kind of like an apprenticeship, it's that kind of thing, whereas, wizards, it's very formal. And in the wizards world, there are women, but they're the servants, and they are female, but that's a hierarchy as well. You've got the head servant, the housekeeper, and you've got, there's a hierarchy there, because that's how their whole setup is. Interesting, the women are everywhere, but they're not seen because they are servants and women to the wizards, and therefore not worth looking at, paying attention to. So there's also a very classist kind of structure as well. Even though I think the wizards do take in kids who are probably quite poor, like if Esk had been a boy, that would have been what happened.
I think if they'd have flung the doors open for her, not quite.
Theoretical, I mean more the theoretical him.
Yes,
because Esk's father's a blacksmith, so he's quite excited when the wizard comes to pass on the power, because we'll have a wizard in the family. But he probably won't stay in the family. He'd go to the Unity University, probably not look back, and he'd be raised even if he's been raised in a lower class thing, once he goes to university, you'll then kind of elevate. It's a little bit like, we have quite a few things like that where you've got an educational establishment, there's magic. It's like, we're magic, and we're going to be off doing this, and the petty concerns are not... Except these wizards aren't even that practical, so they've got loads of servants.
Yeah, I mean, they can't even use their magic to do their laundry for them.
So it would seem. They probably assume the laundry just sort of happens somehow.
Fair point. Or they could do it, but then it would have eyes and tentacles afterwards.
Yeah, it'd probably be awful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it wouldn't go well.
No. And
I think that it's interesting, the Unity University is this big academy. You're thinking, Oxford University, Birmingham University, Cambridge, big...
That was nice of you to put one of those in there.
Big, research establishment, that does these wonderful things that no one really quite understands, but it's very important that they do it. And obviously we get some insights later and
Well, there's a bit now, because in this book, because that's kind of... feels like we're skipping ahead a bit. There's kind of the journey they go on, but it's not... Yeah, they kind of meet those people who live on the canals, and it's like, oh, that's who don't lie.
Yeah,
that felt a bit. Oh, we're doing this now for a bit.
This was. It's like, are they
like, was it Zunes? Was it?
Yeah, are they inverse Romany?
Like water,
yeah. The travelling people who are known for...
Philip Pullman does kind of thing with that, like with people on boats, doesn't it? And bear in mind that Egyptian will come from a similar, because it's all kind of like back to Egypt, Rome. So
I don't know whether it was an attempt to,
I guess, take a stereotype and flip it around. Yeah, it's like, these are travelling people who can only tell the truth. And it's like,
and they have to have
we know what the reputation is. Yes, okay.
Yeah, they have to have one person who can
learn to lie,
who can go and do the trading, because they can lie.
It wasn't that engaging. They're like, I can kind of see it's, but like, all right, okay. And then you get to Ankh-Morpork, and it's interesting that there in Ankh-Morpork there aren't many witches, because like Granny kind of finds a niche because they don't seem to have many witches there.
No.
But they probably do have people who are just midwives or healers or, doctors and that kind of thing. But so she actually does quite well there, because actually she kind of fills a niche that is probably taken up normally by several different people, but she can kind of do it all as
also
one.
With the reputation of having a pointy hat.
Yes.
Because if people come from the rural areas to Ankh-Morpork, they may well respect and obviously the housekeeper, a lot of respect for Granny Weatherwax.
Because of the fortune telling.
Yeah, she can tell the fortune, and
Do we want to talk about Granny Weatherwax?
I think we should.
As it's kind of her introduction, but like a weird one?
It is a little, we do get...
She's definitely there, but not...
I mean, you do have obviously the borrowing is a very is a very Granny Weatherwax.
We have
ability.
the I ain't dead sign.
Yeah, which I think is the how the I ain't dead sign comes about is this.
Yeah. Yes, because they finally think she's dead.
And you know, so you know that's a proto. You know, we start seeing that, and obviously she's there doing her witchy things, and you know. Yeah, but I can't quite put my finger on where it's quite...
It's not kind of like with Death, where he initially turns up and it's like, this guy's a jerk. And you're like, no, this is Granny Weatherwax, but she's not quite how we know her. Because she is still a bit stern, and she is still quite traditional, but maybe she's a bit more rigid-minded. Well, it depends, there's different things, because it does start off with her being like, oh, we're going to go to the big city, and it's like a 2 streets town, but that's more urban than that's the most urban place she's been.
Yeah.
But then she ends up in Ankh-Morpork, and I would have thought there'd be more culture shock than there was. But I think it's the way she almost kind of hustles. She's doing more hustling. Does Ankh-Morpork having a bad influence?
Possibly.
But although she'll visit later, but yeah, because the whole point is she's kind of. This is the one joke I can particularly remember they find an apartment next to some people who are good at passing on stolen goods, because good fences make good neighbours.
Yes.
So, although again, I feel like this one with the humour, it's just bits like that.
Yeah.
There's not like a lot of ongoing jokes so much.
There is something about her that isn't quite.
It's not quite right, but you can see where he's coming from and how the character's building up.
I mean, so some of the attitude, and possibly it's because she needs the other witches to kind of give
foils,
her the form. So without the witches to be her foils, she doesn't
kind of just her, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some of the way she interacts with the other witch and the housekeeper,
which, again, she's kind of hustling her a bit.
Yeah. And I don't think Granny Weatherwax in later books would have hustled, would have done.
She would have just done what was the right thing to do.
Yes,
and people would just have to put up with it because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah,
it was for their own good. But yeah,
and the things about she ended up with her cloak having a slightly.
Oh yeah, well yes, because she was earning quite a lot of money from being in Ankh-Morpork, so she kept like kind of upgrading her outfits, which again doesn't seem very Granny.
No, it's like she wears black.
It's like slightly more commercial Granny.
Yeah,
which feels a bit weird.
And she's a good character in this. It's not it's just that she becomes a better.
She becomes so much better. And I think the other characters, like Eska's fine, but she's like a little kid, and she doesn't have like tons to her. I mean, there's stuff where she's sort of annoyed about things as you'd expect, and there's no her being powerless, not sure what's happening. Well, not powerless, because the whole point is she has too much power. But I think more just
being a 6-year-old and
being a kid and travelling, and also that kind of kid thing that you have where they're very straightforward and they just say things, But that's general kid thing, which I think Pratchett uses at other times as well. But yeah, I mean, we are in her head a bit. But I mean, it's fine. But she doesn't stand out very much.
No, I mean you've got the wizards. I mean you got Simon, who we meet on the journey. He's
kind of one of the he's like a magical savant type.
Yeah, he's going to the Unseen University to be
a wizard found him because he was very good at.
It's what I think is just maths and looking at.
Well, it's that whole savant thing that's basically coded for Asperger's, isn't it? Probably.
I mean, I don't think in this situation he.
I don't think it was directly that.
I think he's just shy and good at maths and.
Again, the classic coding of Asperger's.
Anyway.
But the point is, because you get the impression that because they meet on the journey a little bit, but don't travel together the whole time, that Esk kind of likes Simon. But also realises he needs people to kind of look out for him. And then when they're at the university, so the whole thing is that Granny gets Esk in by approaching the servant. Like, she takes the women's door, basically. Yeah. They try going in through the front, and everyone's like, what? No, women? Huh. So she goes around the back, she finds where the women are, which is the servants' quarters. Esk has her wizard staff disguised as a broom, and basically learns by hanging around in the corridors and sweeping and, sitting under the bleachers and... Is it bleachers? Well, she's kind of hidden around. But they don't notice her because she's a girl cleaning in a place where women are, just appliances, like vacuum cleaners and such. And then kind of the dramatic part of it, the conclusion bit is, you've got the dungeon dimension things, because it's early Discworld, so there's always dungeon dimensions.
Yes,
and then Simon does something, and he's looking at, there's lots of worlds of different shapes.
Yeah, it's kind of these creatures from these other planes want to try and take over Simon.
Which, it was foreshadowed a little bit that Esk was kind of making contact with them, which I think is why Granny took her to the wizards, because she said she's obviously a bit of a liability and Granny couldn't deal with that as well. Although, based on later Granny, she probably could.
Yeah, I'd be more scared of that later. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's all this interest in Simon. So Simon's not much of a character, so I'm not too bothered about him. And Esk seems to like him because he was nice to her on the journey, whereas the wizard he was travelling with was obviously being terribly condescending. This isn't some sort of great friendship, and he's this kid who you feel he's being a bit used by the wizards because he's shy and nervous but knows lots. They're well, you teach everyone all this stuff. And then it turns out the stuff is dangerous.
Yeah.
And then the wizards, who Granny was taking Esk to for safety and to deal with this, don't even know how to deal with it.
No.
They don't realise what's happening. Only Esk figures it out. And then she goes and kind of saves Simon.
Yeah.
And then, again, bear in mind this is the first one I read. I think I found the ending a bit oh, okay. But knowing that it doesn't actually lead to any of the promised stuff, you're a bit oh, okay.
Yeah, it could have been, yes, it could have been the start to something, and even if you didn't have lots of stuff, having Esk turn up at later dates, across the thing would have been interesting. Could have been interesting as a recurring character.
It just feels a little bit like one of those Star Trek episodes that this thing has happened, this has changed his character greatly, and now we will never speak of it again.
Yes, it's been resolved.
That time that they had a kid, it's all right.
Yeah.
Not speak of that again, TNG.
No.
But yeah, you do have Granny kind of, to save Esk, bearing in mind she saved her quite a few times in various ways, busts into the wizards, and then she does her whole Granny thing.
It's a magical duel with the Arch-Chancellor.
That's true, yeah.
And she goes toe to toe with the Arch-Chancellor, doing the traditional sword in the stone, shape changing.
Oh yeah, the thing in Sandman, it's the oldest game in Sandman, isn't it? Yeah. I remember the Sandman one better, but I've read that a lot more.
I think the Sandman one does it in a different. Obviously, the classic Sword in the Stone one is pretty classic
from the Disney film.
Yeah, I think the Sandman one is an interesting take on that idea.
Yeah,
this one is a pretty much.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's just back. I think if nothing else, it's just to kind of show, well, actually, Granny does have a lot of power.
Yeah,
because she's going toe to toe with the Arch-Chancellor.
Yeah, I think before that, it's Granny's obviously good at borrowing, and she can do some magics, but how much of it is headology, how much of it is herbs, and just selling various things that people find a bit unrespectable in fortunes and things like that. But yeah, it does show her power. And then you kind of have the whole thing where they're working together to kind of save these kids who are kind of saving themselves a bit as well. And the wizards don't seem to know what's going on. And then you have the thing where it just sort of ends in this whole, the Arch-Chancellor's quite taken with Granny in that way that wizards are, where they're oh, an age-appropriate lady who's modestly dressed, but we don't have women anywhere, and we're monastic-ish, so okay, I'm not quite sure what to do with this, but there's something, which is a continued theme with the wizards throughout, I think. Yeah. But ladies, we're not sure what to do, but maybe.
We have to remember though, the wizard staff does have a knob on the end.
That's more when we get to Nanny. But yeah, it's and then there's this whole thing that she becomes kind of almost a witch. Well, it's the thing. Witches aren't gregarious. And was it Granny? Again, it's later. They say, was it Granny is the leader that the witches do not have?
Yes.
But at this point, you don't get that sense because you haven't got the whole community. She mentions other witches. There clearly is her interacting with others a bit, but it's all side stuff. But yeah, this whole idea we'll teach the boys some witchery and we'll teach the girls some wizardry, and we can have an exchange. It's and then it never happened. You're what was all this?
Yeah.
And even then, even not having read other stuff before, I think it didn't quite feel very satisfying when I read it, when I was 14, 15. The ending kind of makes promises aren't followed through, which you could see as an empty gesture towards equality, which there have been many over time in society in general, but I don't actually think that's what Sir Terry was trying to do. I think he just went a different way with later stories.
Yeah, I don't think it was a deliberate diss on
Well, no, I'm not saying it's
not
ridiculous, but you could be making a point, but I don't think he is making the point.
He may well have intended to come back to this later. And to be honest...
wasn't sure what to do with it.
Either wasn't sure what to do with it, or other things overtook the popularity of other...
Yeah. Also, is it funnier if the wizards are all these
yes,
doddering men who are a bit scared and alarmed about women and not sure what to do with them?
You don't actually want them to have actually...
I mean, it's interesting because, well, like I said before, the wizards obviously eschew sex, but the witches are kind of involved in the consequences with it every step, even if they aren't involved personally, and it doesn't really go into Granny's history at the moment. But yeah, sort of like births, as we... Yeah. Well, that's not a direct consequence, but
okay,
yeah.
Well,
yes,
maternity is a direct consequence.
Okay, but more that all the stuff we said they were selling before, and all the stuff they're involved in, kind of any consequence of that, or which is involved in, and wizards just have nothing to do with it. And again, it's a bit like all stuff in the community the witch is involved in, and the wizards are somewhere else doing something.
They are separate. They are in their own little bubble or campus, as it could be called.
Indeed, that is the word for that.
Doing their own, magical thing.
Yeah.
There's saying, obviously, there is in the Unseen University, there is the sort of secret way to get in and out of the. Some of the wizards are leaving the.
It's suggested they're mostly going drinking or something, but yeah, there's a bit. I mean, yeah, it is mentioned in Fantastic that Rincewind has had sex. That must have been what it was. It was a bit alluded to, but so I think there's a bit of that, but it's the vaguely monastic thing, you don't marry, you don't have women as part of your community, particularly, except the servants, because then you can just ignore them. And obviously Soteria's not going so far in the sort of social thing to explore the grimmer side of that, which obviously would be a thing in another type of book.
Yes, we're aiming for comedy, although as we said, this one... little lighter on the comedy, I felt. So I didn't feel like... I
don't feel like there are any standout puns other than that one I just said that I remember. Granny isn't terribly punished, but again, I feel like it's the interaction with her and the other witches that's really funny in the other books.
She's the straight man.
She's nanny. But yeah, I think one thing I will say is there's not... In some respects, the fact that stuff doesn't change that much, particularly because at this point, I guess the Arts Chancellor changes so much anyway, and I'm going to give credit to Juliet E. McKenna, because it's something she said in some panels about, it's not like the heroine got up one morning and suddenly invented feminism. It's because in some books it's about here is our girl hero who's going to make her way in a man's world, and everyone's going to be like, oh, we were wrong about girls, women are allowed to be equal. It's that's not how things are. You can have one exceptional one, and then you're like, well, that's just one. And that's that, and it does show Granny using women's ways in, like I say, with the servants' entrance, with talking to the housekeeper, that's the men won't let you in the front gate, but so and again, there's a lot of stuff about women's ways and things like that. So I mean, I think it does do a good exploration of various feminine side of things, and like I say, it is very explicitly not sexualized because of who the characters are. So I do think that's good. And I do think, again, it wasn't like anyone would, at that point, have been expecting Pratchett to do that.
No.
So I do think it's good. I think it's just knowing that things are better later.
Yeah.
Which has been a theme of these episodes so far.
Yeah, I think we're definitely... This is... I think we should look at wrapping... Although I will point out the librarian was once again in this one, and obviously a standout character for...
Oh, yes, that's true, yes.
And we do get a brief more look at the library.
Yeah, we do see more of the library,
we will see more of the library later. That is highly important. But the librarian's there. I mean, and as characters, you don't... there's only really... and obviously Death turns up because
briefly.
He does, but yeah, he wasn't
He wasn't really in it
no, there wasn't a...
He strokes a cat and then leaves.
Yeah, but I mean, this one is kind of... With the exception of this, a little bit of Granny stuff and the librarian, there's not really much that carries later on.
That's true.
The fleshing out of the Unseen University
a bit,
but again, it changes again by the time you get to, sorcery.
Sorcery is a big change. That's kind of the point of sorcery.
So again, it's not, this one is, it's kind of just there and is a bit of missed potential.
Yeah, I kind of see that. Again, I think it was It's a bold change when you consider the last 2 books. It's just in the whole run, it's like only fine. It's like the starting of something, but it's going to get better. So
Yeah.
And again, even having read the first time, I remember thinking, "Oh, I'll read some more of these," but not being particularly enamoured of this, which is why I remembered very little of it.
Yeah. And I think if you're doing going again, we wouldn't advise anyone start with this book, even if you're keen on witches. With Sisters, which we'll get to in about 3 books' time. This is a okay, very skippable. I think. Yeah, it's a shame to say, but
we obviously won't completely discourage you because I wasn't completely discouraged.
No,
yeah, it's.
I think from the point of view of definitely there's so much more later, and the plot points in this just don't really.
I mean, in some respects, just saying, "Oh, a girl in a man's world," that's quite.
I suppose
already a tropey thing,
and some respects,
and it did go more. It did go more of a soft power feminine way. Again, in a very traditional fantasy, you'd expect somebody to take up arms and storming. Well, I think in some respects, magical equivalent, but
yeah, I mean, in your traditional fantasy, Eswood ended up being, the next Arch Chancellor. Kind of thing. She'd have risen up and,
Yeah, and this is the thing. Esk isn't. I mean, she's only a kid, but yeah, she's and she doesn't see herself also as like a representative of her gender. No. That's the other thing. I mean, and again, that's she's just a kid who's got a different kind of power no one around her knows how to deal with. So try and take it to experts, and it turns out the experts are dismissive and not that helpful.
Yeah,
which and it seems like maybe things get better, but they kind of don't.
I think things in general for the disc improve.
I meant more specifically with the whole magic thing, but I think Sateri just went a different way.
Anyway, I think our general sum up of it is it's all right.
It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, an important parish notice. Up until now, we've been recording at our dining table, which was oblong or eldritch, but not really. But now we have a dining table that is, in fact, a disc.
So we are definitely
on theme.
Yes, although it is only supported by wooden legs, not
a piece of cardboard.
And a piece of cardboard, not a turtle and 4 elephants. Although
I don't know how you get chairs around that.
I'm just also thinking a turtle and 4 elephants might do a better job of not wobbling. But it's
it's just difficult to get chairs around.
Fair. And the bit noisy, the elephant's trumpeting and the turtle snapping at you, wondering why it's not in space. This has drifted slightly a bit.
It has a little bit, yes.
Anyway, I think we'll wrap it up. Next time we're actually hitting Mort.
Yeah.
So this is the one. This is the. I think we're starting to get. I think we hit a high note and then we drop a little bit for a little bit after.
Okay. We'll get to that.
We've got a couple of. But Mort is
Mort is next. Yeah.
Mort is good.
So and you're looking forward to it.
I'm looking.
Fair enough. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.